criminal law?
So here's why I asked you these questions. I asked you these questions because right now federal judges are under the worst shadow of physical threat in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of this country. And in responding to those threats, we have the United States Marshals Service, which reports to the Department of Justice. And I have now over a dozen times asked the Marshals Service, will you investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence justifies it? That's a super easy question. The answer is, yeah, of course we will. They won't answer that. They won't answer that. And I point this out because judges across the country need to pay attention to the fact that the Marshals Service won't confirm that it will investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence supports that.
What you just heard is a United States Senator stating that the agency responsible for protecting federal judges has repeatedly refused to answer a basic law enforcement question. Will you investigate who organized a threat, not just who delivered it? The U.S. Marshals Service reports to the Department of Justice. The DOJ is run by an administration that has publicly targeted federal judges for impeachment, called their rulings illegitimate, and whose senior official told DOJ attorneys to tell courts to go to hell when deportation orders were blocked. That is the context. Senator Whitehouse isn't making a political speech here. He's identifying a structural failure, and he walked 4 judicial nominees through the exact legal doctrines, solicitation, conspiracy, RICO, that any serious law enforcement investigation into threats would use. They agreed with everyone. That agreement makes the Marshals' silence impossible to explain as anything other than
Just to finish Senator Blumenthal's point, I hope you realize how ridiculous the 4 of you look, spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. If you can't even sit here and say that Joe Biden won that election or that the Capitol was attacked, what's left? What's left if a hard case comes your way as a judge, and let's say the Trump administration is bearing down on that? Why would we ever believe that you would give the litigants a fair hearing and a fair decision if the executive branch was leaning in on you when we can't get a reasonable answer out of any of you?
deliberate. Those nominees want lifetime judicial appointments. Whitehouse's question is precise. If you can't give independent answers under sworn testimony when the executive branch wants you to dodge, what happens in a courtroom when the executive branch wants a specific outcome? He pointed to Lindsey Graham, a senior Republican, a friend of Trump's, as someone who would have their backs. He was telling them they had political cover, to be honest. They still wouldn't do it. This is the judicial independence problem in concrete form. Judges are supposed to be the final check on executive overreach. Right now, the people being nominated to fill those roles are demonstrating, under oath, in public, that they will not give uncomfortable answers when the executive branch is watching. And the agency protecting sitting judges from physical threats is demonstrating the same compliance by refusing to investigate whether those...
Let me ask a different question, a legal question. A judge, you want to be judges. A judge gets a threat to the judge's life or to the judge's family. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat? Ms. Clark?
Senator, as a prosecutor, there are instances where there's some responsibility that is assigned to someone who is not the utterer of a threat to an individual. And so to answer your question, yes, I can imagine.
Do you agree?
Yes, Senator, and if confirmed to the bench, I would follow all Supreme Court precedent and Ninth Circuit
You agree,
precedent.
Mr. Rick, you agree?
Yes, Senator, I would agree with that.
I don't know that I care what you think, Ms. Westerkamp, because you're going to international trade and you're probably not going to see much of this, but do you agree?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and those doctrines that would provide the legal basis for investigation in those scenarios would include doctrines like, name one, Ms. Clark.
Senator, doctrines that are, if someone is essentially carrying out
Solicitation, would that be
Yes.
one? Solicitation of a
Yes.
threat?
yes,
Or a conspiracy out of which the threat emerged, would that be another one?
yes,
Threats are coordinated. What Whitehouse just constructed is a legal architecture. Solicitation of a threat, conspiracy out of which a threat emerged, enterprise liability under RICO. Every one of those doctrines points investigators away from the individual who makes a call and toward the network that directed the call. That's Investigative 101. Any FBI agent, any competent prosecutor, any first-year law student knows this. And the Marshals Service, which has the statutory authority and the obligation to protect federal judges, won't confirm it will do this. In fiscal year 2026, 129 federal judges have already been flagged as threatened. Threats have doubled in 3 years. The federal judiciary created its own security task force because it doesn't fully trust the executive branch's protection apparatus anymore. Senate Democrats introduced a bill to remove the marshals from DOJ control entirely and transfer authority to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. When a law enforcement agency's political loyalty becomes a live question in discussions about whether it will actually protect the people it's legally required to protect, that agency has already...
And why would that be the case? That would be the case because when you get behind the utterer of a lot of these threats, you run into right-wing conspiracies. And this MAGA Department of Justice would rather not go there. And so they leave judges exposed with investigations in which they aren't doing investigative 101 work that you've all identified as plausible legal theories.
already failed at its mission. Run the chain. Verified threats against federal judges have doubled in 3 years. The U.S. Marshals have been asked over 20 times by Senate Democrats whether they investigate who coordinates those threats. No answer. Meanwhile, a Trump subcommittee held a hearing targeting the specific judge who ordered a halt to illegal deportation flights. A judge who now faces a coordinated campaign of impeachment pressure, ethics complaints, and public attack. 4 nominees just sat in a Senate hearing and refused to confirm documented fact. Not because they lack knowledge, because they've calculated that honesty carries political risk. If that calculation holds under oath, in public, with cameras running, it will hold on the bench when the stakes are higher and the cameras are off. This is a coherent system. Compliant nominees, a captured enforcement agency, a political apparatus that attacks judges who rule the wrong way and refuses to investigate who's sending them death threats. The rule of law doesn't collapse in a single moment. It collapses through accumulated refusals to follow basic procedures, the refusal to answer a simple question, the refusal to investigate beyond the obvious, the refusal to protect the people who are supposed to enforce the law. That's the story. Subscribe, share it. Because these hearings don't stay in the record, they get confirmed and they get appointed.